Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. At the time of this stream, we're still relatively early in Chris's campaign, War for the Lost Plane. However, I mentioned that I wanted to get started with my crafting series and start planning what my next D&D adventure is going to be. But before that, we need to figure out what D&D campaign I'm going to run. So with this video, I'm going to go over the campaigns I've been considering. Now this stream is being privately live streamed to patrons at patreon.com/roguewatson and then uploaded publicly to the channel. So shout out to Platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Manuel, Basil, Tom, Huskar124, Wizard Princess, and my favorite D&D player. In gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos Dade Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, AK, Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard, Lion, Sam, Arash, Lumpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Scalenia, and Nick. Thank you all very much for your support. This is the first time I've done anything like this, which is just a private patron-only stream. But I thought it'd be a fun way for patrons to kind of give me some feedback and discuss things as if we were doing a session of crafting X. But in this case, it's going to be crafting pre-production, whatever I've got planned for, which is not much, and we can not necessarily decide what the next campaign will be after this video, but a way for you all to see where my head's at, the adventures that I've got it narrowed down to, and then following this stream, I will put up a poll on the Patreon page where you all can give me some, feedback that way and say which ones you were excited about. And from there, none of these things are binding necessarily. I'm still obviously the one that has to make the final choice, but hopefully at that point I can get a better idea of what everybody is wanting to see. Because obviously, my opinion is going to overrule everything else. My players, and I did release a survey for my players, given like a Google Doc survey, that they could give me some feedback on and see what they're looking for. Even though these are all my best friends and we've been playing games for years, I think it's just really useful to see kind of where they're at in terms of different themes or what they're wanting out of D&D. And it's something we really haven't done. I mean, we do a good job, I think, after we finish a campaign of getting together and talking about kind of the things that we liked and all those. And it's, we're talking to each other all the time. So these kind of formal surveys aren't really a necessary thing for us like they would be for other groups. But it is a very useful way for me to kind of gauge where they're at in terms of what they've really enjoyed, what the memorable moments are. If they like a story-driven campaign versus just an open world, and where the pillars are in terms of the role-playing and exploration and combat and all that kind of stuff. So that's been useful feedback to get. I actually need to look up, Charlene, I need to look up what the results were on that. I think I've got most of them back by now. Let's see. That's my Google survey. I meant to have that pulled up. Let's see, before we jump into discussing that, how can I look up my Google survey? Did I still have that in here? Let's see, docs. It's under forms, maybe. Okay, we'll do it live. But I'm going to go through also and run down which ones I'm excited about. There we go. And I am going to be sticking to D&D. That's not really a question. I mean, the Patreon page says we're doing a D&D campaign. We've been running D&D 5e for 5 years, 6 years, whenever, I don't know, it's almost for the entirety of 5th edition's existence. It's worked very well for us. We all seem to enjoy it. It's just got a good mix of having firm rules while also being very moddable, and it's easy to understand. Like, I don't see any reason to change that for our main campaign going forward. So definitely still doing D&D 5th edition. Okay, I've gotten 4 responses, which is pretty good out of 5 people for the survey. And none of this stuff is super surprising. Yeah, my wife's yelling at me from the other room. She hates travel. That's pretty funny. In terms of rather do montages than go through random encounters and do all that. People definitely want. I put a scale from 1 to 5 on if folks want a story-driven campaign being 1 and the open world being 5, and it's all at like 1. One person put 2, but it's very much 1. Which all of our previous campaigns have basically been that story-driven stuff. We've never really done a full open world where it's like, hey, you can go wherever you want and do these different things. Certain campaigns might have put things like on. I think Fandelver was actually probably the closest one that did open world in terms of here's some different side quests, you can go do all these different things, but for the most part we stay pretty close to giving a more story-driven experience, and that's kind of what this is. But yeah, there's people list kind of the same epic moments that we all enjoyed and had fun with, and just were a lot of funny moments that really most of these were not set up by me at all. It was just circumstances happened where the players had a lot of fun with a moment. That's obviously something really hard for a DM to plan for. So, but you try to create, I guess, situations that allow that to happen. Everybody really likes combat, which I guess isn't that surprising, but everybody voted combat as being one of the things they like the most, which I guess is a good thing that we're playing D&D 5e, because that's probably what D&D does best is combat. People do like role-playing. I think exploration is 3rd, role-playing is 2nd. I'm looking at a kind of a bar graph that I created here. Let's see, yeah, so combat is really fun. People tend to like dialogue, puzzles, midway, and then travel is kind of eh. So interesting about the travel. People don't really like to go through the motions of like camping and random encounters and all that as much as having like set pieces and events to do, which I can definitely see that. So yeah, that's kind of the feedback that I've been getting. People like some of the NPCs. Can't remember the name, doesn't help my point. The leader of the Red Wizards. Yeah, people like to talk to their villains, have them reoccur, as well as mentioning stuff like, now I can't remember him, Orvex, which, because I didn't have a good set idea of what I wanted to necessarily do with Orvex, it just kind of developed organically over the course of that campaign. So Orvex ended up going in a really cool direction where I could do this. And you remember, some of you, with the crafting episodes where I was talking about, oh, wouldn't it be cool if Orvex became this to the players? And I thought that was a neat twist that I could employ, which is turning him into a villain. All right, so Entomb was fairly open world in Schult. It's tough because yes, elements of it were open world, but also I kind of developed it in a way that really funneled players into very specific sections and areas. So it's not like we just opened the jungle and been like, all right, go nuts, here are some different locations. I did have some of that, but I also was like, okay, here's an NPC, they want to go here. So I could kind of, motivate the players into going to those certain areas, and it really ended up being a linear sequence. Even though they've got this big jungle, they could technically go wherever, I did put things on the map that led them along a very specific sequence. I think the closest we got is when they got to the top of Mambala, and they could actually look around and see different points on the map, and then they could decide where they go from there. So, that's the system I like to do. I like to give players a limited area, and this is a consequence of playing on Roll20 straight up. This would not be, if I was designing it with pen and paper, that would be a different conversation. But because we're playing on Roll20 and because I need to prepare maps, I need to limit the amount of areas that we can go to, but I still want to give the players as many choices and options as I can. So the best way I can think of to balance that is to give players a limited area and a limited number of choices and things they can go do, and then let them make some choices on where they want to go and what and how they want to tackle that stuff, if they want to tackle some stuff at all. So that's kind of the balance level. All right, so I have narrowed down what I want to do for my next campaign to, we're going to call it 5 ideas we're going to go over one by one. I wanted to specifically wait until after the release of Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frost Maiden, in case I like that adventure. Turns out I really like that adventure. That is definitely on this list, which is great because I honestly, excuse me, I'm still getting over this freaking head cold. I haven't been excited about a official D&D 5e release since probably Tomb. There's been a lot of just for whatever reasons, things just haven't really spoken to me very well, which is a bummer. And so I'm really happy that Rime of the Frost Maiden is one that I'm excited about. But that's one of several, and we're going to go over, the different... Basically, I'm just going to go over all of these and talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each one, and then we can all discuss them from there. Did you ask about level of the party? So, no, we didn't go over that. We're playing a high-level campaign right now, which would normally, that would be a good question, is like, man, we've never played a high-level campaign. Should we maybe do something like that? But since Chris is doing that with his campaign, I think that'll probably scratch that itch. And then for the purposes of my campaign, it will be a traditional start at the beginning and then go from there. I will say that I don't think any of us ever want to start at level 1 again. I think level 1 is just bullshit. And I can work into the narrative of like, hey, you've all come back from your first, newbie training, you're come back from your first semester at whatever, cleric school or something, and you're level 2 now. So I literally don't want to start at level 1, but still I like doing the hero's journey. And I think, a large, all of the material for D&D is for like tier 1 and tier 2, let's face it. Like that's where the majority of it is being played. I would love to make it beyond level 12 at the end of a campaign, but a lot of these that I'm looking at, that's what they go to. They're all, level 1 through 12, so that's something to think about also. Recurring villains are hard to do because they can be killed off, yes. Which is why you can get away with things like somebody mentioned Zagmira in the thing, because I had her appear as like a hologram and talk to the players. And Chris did that with the Blue Dragon in Storm King's Thunder, where she appeared several times, either in a cutscene or as something that could talk to us. Because, yeah, unfortunately, it's especially if they're not, like, super powerful, like, demons and dragons, if they're just people, that's very hard to escape without your players fucking with them in some way and trying to get them to come back, so. Alright, so I mentioned these are all D&D 5e plans, and we're going to start discussing them now. Starting with Curse of Strahd. So, Strahd is still one of the most popular D&D 5e adventures. It is consistently the highest rated 5e campaign book that Wizards has put out, despite it being very old by now. Was it 2015, 2016? I mean, it's getting up there. And in fact, they're recently releasing the revamped, I think, restaked, whatever version that kind of updates and changes and adds some things. I believe I haven't really looked at it too closely, but for the reason that it's very popular, it would obviously be a popular one to do. And something I'm always thinking about is, obviously it's my group is number 1, but then we do put on a show. It's on YouTube, it's a channel, and one of my most popular videos still to this day is me doing a review of Curse of Strahd, despite that review being very old and I'm sure very low quality and crappy by my standards today. So that would be a factor. It would be a very popular one to do. People would be searching for Curse of Strahd. I've seen requests from fans about, oh, you guys should do Strahd. That's all a positive factor, and it is a published adventure, so it's got the maps, it's got the tokens, everything's already in Roll20. Maybe not necessarily 100% ready to go. I think there are some like map scaling issues, and obviously not everything has a map, but it exists as a thing in Roll20, which is obviously a big advantage compared to others. So it's got a lot going for it, and being older and popular, it also has a lot of supplemental material available for it on the DM's Guild and on like maps being available and all of that. That's also a very important factor to think about. As you discuss these campaigns, are there going to be spoilers? I probably should have thought about that. In terms of if you have played these campaigns or not. I don't plan on getting too into the weeds in spoilers. I will say that. I'd like to talk about, it's part of what I'm going to talk about are the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So I may have to mention, maybe not specific stories, but like if I have problems with some story elements or something. So if folks specifically want this to be spoiler free, I can do my best on that. I'm just doing this is an overview of each adventure and not a hardcore analysis of each adventure. Unless we want to start analyzing each one, I can do that. But I'm going to try to be more vague if I can. So that's good. That's a good question, Tiny. So the disadvantage to Curse of Strahd is I'm not very passionate about it, which is a big disadvantage. I've done the least amount of legwork for it. I don't even own the book for it. I don't know. For some reason, I just don't necessarily see Gothic horror going over well for our group for the length of an entire campaign. I think theme-wise, we tend to be very, lighthearted and jokey and adventure-y. It's just more, Pirates of the Caribbean or what's another, maybe Indiana Jones, versus something like Game of Thrones, for example. Like, we're just not serious. Like, we can do some fun moments occasionally, but for the most part, we're not really doing, and not, Curse of Strahd, I guess, isn't necessarily just all bleak and seriousness all the time, for sure, but that theme doesn't lend itself necessarily to the kind of swashbuckling adventure themes that I think our group is more keen to. Now, that's just what we're used to, so maybe having it be this dark Gothic world would be interesting, but for that main reason, I don't necessarily see the theme working particularly well for us. And the other reason is I'm just not, I'm not super passionate about Strahd compared to others. I recognize that it's really good. I think it still has one of the best villains because it's an actual villain who appears constantly and is a presence in the narrative, which is a huge problem for a lot of Wizards of the Coast official 5e campaign books. They just tend to gloss over their villains or maybe not have them appear until the very end. God, Acererak, who is on the cover of Tomb of Annihilation, is the worst example of that. Literally just shows up at the end of the final boss fight just because. Like, it's like, oh, it's Acerek's here. Like, he has no real place in the story whatsoever. So, but that's a good thing for Strahd. I think Strahd does a good job of that. It also kind of similar to Tomb, without going to spoilers, obviously Castle Ravenloft is a mega dungeon that's a big part of that campaign, and it just reminds me a little bit of how Tomb works, which also ended in a mega dungeon. That's kind of the ultimate climax, and I like those dungeons a lot. I think that's really fun, and I think Castle Ravenloft's a really, really cool area, but also something to keep in mind. So, I don't know, it's just, I'm not quite as enamored with Strahd, despite it being a very, very popular adventure. I recognize how good it is. It's something that I just haven't really delved into much, and honestly, I have not looked at it much since I did that initial Roll20 review all those years ago. I think it was my first Roll20 review, was Curse of Strahd. It was one of the earliest ones that they adapted to Roll20, and still probably one of their best adaptations because the original D&D 5e book has that weird kind of, I think, that isometric like cutaway map style, which it looks fantastic, but you can't actually play on that. You need the 5-foot grid battle map to actually play on that. And Roll20 adapted the castle in a 5-foot battle map, which is a huge plus. So that makes that Roll20 adaptation way better because that helps you actually be able to play on the castle. So it does have that going for it. If any of you are particularly passionate about Strahd or want us to see us do Strahd, or what your thoughts are, I would love to elicit that feedback. But as it is, admittedly, out of all the ones we're going over, Strahd is personally the one that I am least interested in. I mean, it made this list. It made the cut. It made the cut of my final 5, if you want to call it that. But it's the lowest one of the list, I think. Sammy won't be playing Dragon Queen. No, we won't be. My wife actually mentioned that one as a possibility because it is very story-driven, very railroaded, which actually I think my group responds to very well. I think they like being railroaded for the most part, and we like having, we kind of use Acquisitions Inc. as a template where we try to highlight like the good events and go from there and go, big event to big event and not necessarily just wander the world and do whatever we want. So I think the railroad nature of Tyranny of Dragons works well, but it's old, it's got a lot of problems. That whole one chapter is just traveling, which is bullshit. I don't see myself ever necessarily running that adventure. And it does the whole, like, it's just, blasé. It's got the cults, the dragons. It seems like a good adventure for the first outing for 5e, but at this point, after all the stuff we've done, I don't see us doing Tyranny of Dragons, so that did not make the list. Love to see you do Strahd, but the little bit of prep I've done for Strahd, I find that you need a group that's really up for delving into a more serious horror-themed campaign. Yeah, which is one of my primary concerns, I think. I don't think, and a reason I think Realm of the Frostbane will work better is because because the horror is more up to the DM on how much you want to play out, like the environmental hazards and the dangers and all that. It can really change between that and a more adventure-y theme. And you can actually go between them, I think. Some areas can be really creepy and scary, and others can be more adventure-y. So, whereas Strahd, you are in Ravenloft, you are in Gothic world, Transylvania. It is all of that all the time, and it's harder to change off of that. So that's something. And yeah, Tiny for sure. I think that's the biggest. Honestly, out of all of these, Strahd has the biggest. I literally have in my notes pluses and minuses to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, and Strahd has probably my biggest minus, which is just I'm not that into it. But I wanted to put it on here so that we could talk about it, especially because I know I'm going to get some folks that are going to be like, what about Strahd? Excuse me, I have to literally keep blowing my nose. I've gotten over this head cold like a week ago, but I'm an old man, and it still lingers. It's annoying as hell. Really annoying because a lot of what I do is, video work and talking, and I don't like being nasally and snotty. It's gross. Alright, so that's Strahd. Next up, we have one that I am excited about. Eberron. I recently, as in the last couple months, gotten into Eberron as a setting. I'm not familiar with Eberron. I didn't know the history behind it. I was vaguely aware that it was a world like Forgotten Realms, like Greyhawk and all that, but I didn't really know what was interesting or special about Eberron. And in reviewing DM's Guild products, of which I've reviewed several that take place in Eberron, including an excellent one that was an Eberron like guide to the setting, I became really interested in it. And the mark of interest is me suddenly researching it and looking up information. I ordered the book. I bought it months ago and read through a good chunk of Eberron Rising from the Last War, which is the new 5e book that they released that kind of officially updates the Eberron setting into 5th edition, I believe. I think there was one that released before, maybe Exploring Eberron was the name. They've done some of them on the DM's Guild, but this is the official one from Wizards. And I am really interested in Eberron. I think it's a really neat setting. It's got a cool theme of fantasy, but more in the future, like Industrial Revolution, like Wild West era, where you've got trains and guns, but you're still in a fantasy world of elves and dwarves and wizards, which I think is really cool. I think that's different. It's still 5e, it's still D&D, but it changes things and allows you to do different kind of themes. You can do like a train heist, or do the classic like Seven Samurai Magnificent Seven with a village in the western town. Like there's so many different ideas and concepts I've got. They've got a big city that's just all like verticality, and you get on these little flying saucer things and roll around. It's almost sci-fi with the way this city works. Just some really, really cool concepts and ideas, and I was very, very excited to explore Eberron. And Rising from the Last War does provide a lot of good material for it. One of the problems is it's not a campaign book, which is an issue. Eberron Rising from the Last War is a source book. It's a setting. It has a level 1 campaign, or level 1 adventure, sorry, and it's okay. It's not thrilling. But I would basically be having to do my entire own story. Now, raise my brightness level because the sun is constantly going in and out. So this would be an interesting exercise in homebrew, semi-homebrew, right? Because it's... And this would be the kind of homebrew that I would probably prefer to do, which is I'm using an established universe, a world that exists. It's got lore, it's got characters, it's got cities. But I would have to craft my own campaign out of that. Now, the nice thing is, Eberron has a lot of supplemental material. There goes the sun again. It's a popular setting, and there's a lot of material, for example, on the DM's Guild, and you could craft, and I have been doing the legwork. So with Strahd, I've done nothing. I was thinking about maybe Strahd, but I haven't done any prep work for it. The rest of these, I've all done some form of prep work in pre-production. And with Eberron, whenever they did that pay it forward sale, I think, on the DM's Guild, where like more money went to the creators or something, I spent a bunch of money, and I purchased 100% all Eberron stuff. It was just a bunch of adventures. You'd think I wouldn't have to buy anything on the DM's Guild at this point, but there was still, there's tons of good stuff on there. And I purchased a lot of Eberron adventures and material and started perusing all that. I looked up, because Eberron, I think, came out in 3rd edition or maybe 3.5 edition, and I looked up a lot of the old adventures that actually ran in Dungeon Magazine, because you can find those on the internet. All those magazines are archived, and I downloaded and looked up a bunch of those adventures. That's kind of stuff that I could update to 5e. So partly, for the purposes of this campaign, it would be partly homebrewed, but partly me combining a lot of like DM's Guild style adventures into a overarching campaign adventure that takes place in Eberron. And it would be a very challenging to do that. And as Jordan is mentioning here in the chat, I would have to do all the maps. There's no, unlike something like Strahd, which has a Roll20, module that you can just throw on there and then add to it. You'd be basically starting, and the one map that it's available. I've got access to the Eberron Rising of the Last War 5e campaign on Roll20. I reviewed it, but it's literally got like a few maps, and they're all that really awful like black and white graph paper style that doesn't work for me at all. So yeah, all of these things that I'm talking about, all these adventures, unless it happens to be a DM's Guild adventure that comes with a map, I would have to be forming all of those maps, and that is a lot more work to think about. Now, in terms of the prep work, the advantage I'm in right now is that I'm not under a big time constraint. Chris's campaign is still pretty early. We knew that originally we were planning on having the campaign be around a Fandelver length and have it end in December, because that would be great timing for the Herrings having their baby, and then obviously holidays and all that stuff would just kind of make it for a good time to have a break. Unfortunately, we all kind of grossly underestimated how long it would take us. We shortened our playtime, and then it's been taking us a lot longer to get through this material, which is something that is probably the most difficult thing to do in D&D in terms of running a show and stuff, is that it's not scripted at all. We don't know when we're going to make it to the end of whatever episode, whatever time. And to give you an example, that first area, that tower for, I guess, this isn't really spoilers for War for the Lost Planet if you haven't seen any of that campaign yet, but it was originally supposed to, according to Chris, take about 2 sessions, and it took us like 5 or 6. So I don't know at this point when Chris's campaign will end. I do know that it will end later than what we initially planned. So I've got even more time to plan, which is an advantage because I actually have time to make maps and stuff, but that's also a negative for doing Eberron because I have to cough and get rid of all this phlegm. There's no campaign, so I'm having to craft that with a bunch of bits and pieces of other campaigns and my own ideas, and B, there's no maps or anything in place for that. There's no maps, tokens, all of that, so I would have to make all of that. So that's a lot of work. Now, I don't have to do the work of creating my own world and universe. It's already there. I can work with that, and thankfully there are established adventures I can use because Eberron is, a thing, but it would take me a lot of time. So that is a good question. Some of the patrons could help with the content. That's interesting. I haven't elicited specific work that you all can do. Certainly the biggest help that patrons provide, especially for Tomb, was during my crafting streams, because I could bounce ideas off of all of you. And you've seen those crafting episodes, or you were there for them, and there were a lot of ideas, a lot of great ideas that I literally got from folks watching and chatting with me about it, and that was a huge help. So already I take a lot of that work from patrons, not necessarily like the literal physical map building work, although that's something I guess we could look at, but just bouncing ideas off of all of you and generating that content has been amazing. Like, a lot of really good content and ideas have come literally from doing those craftings, which is why I'm so excited about starting that up again and getting those ideas flowing. Even during pre-production, when we don't even have the character, when we're still in the middle of our other campaign, that's why I want to get that crafting thing started so we can start making all those cool prep ideas. I don't want to over prep too much, and there's only so much you can do without knowing even what your player characters are, because that's going to change a lot of stuff too. But at least having a lot of those maps and things and ideas and campaign adventures, all of that prepped is a big help. Weekly bandwidth while the campaign is in place, another thing for sure. Yeah, that's very true. How much time do I have once we're starting into the campaign in order to throw new content in there? It's going to be tricky. And let's not, I can't kid myself. I've got a, right now almost 4-month-old, and that's, I'm not, I do try to devote as much time as I can to this, but I'll be honest, I've enjoyed not having to do D&D right now still. Like, I enjoyed having that big break that first month when she was born, and I've been enjoying having the break right now, trying to get on my feet, and it's been, going to my personal life too much. I do that for the Monday update for patrons, all of you know, but I will be putting this video up on YouTube. But, the COVID pandemic, all of that has created a lot of extra hardships and challenges for our life right now. So things have gotten crazy. That is definitely something that is in the back of my head is, yes, I've got more time to prep for my next campaign, but how much time do I actually have in terms of, if we look at Tomb, I spent a lot of work on Tomb, and Tomb was already in play. Like, it had the maps, it had the tokens, it had everything there. So in terms of me having to actually create like maps and stuff from scratch, there was very little of that. I think I had to throw together a few random encounter maps for the jungle, but otherwise there was like that one dungeon Orlunga, and then it was all pretty much ready to go. So I was really spoiled on that. So I keep thinking like, well, I've got all this time to make maps, but like, do I really, like, in terms of making all that content from scratch? I don't know. But I still think Eberron is really fun. I really like so much about it. I love how it uses a faction system to determine like what your party is. So you can be like private investigators, or you can be agents, or you can be like, werewolf hunting zealots. There's, you can work for like a newspaper. There's so many cool avenues you can use to have your adventuring group already, like, why you do this, and here are the threads that tie you together and all of that. I think that's just a lot of fun and interesting stuff. Now, you could apply that to any, setting and adventure for sure, but I think the factions and the cities and the ideas of Eberron excite me more than necessarily anything in the Forgotten Realms, and it's just different. Like, it's different to be able to get away from the Sword Coast and get away from all that. Even though I guess our technically War for the Lost Plains is not in the Sword Coast, but just having that more modern, not modern, but industrial revolution style setting in a fantasy world is definitely exciting, and it's an interest to me. So, the advantages, I think it's a cool world. The disadvantages, I would have to make a campaign. Like there is no full-length Eberron campaign. There are like Adventure League stuff that I think does span, and it's things that I've been looking at. And if you look at the DM's Guild, there is a lot of really great content in there to where I think I could pull several adventures out and explore them and somehow still tie in an overarching campaign to that and make it satisfying. I think I could do that with maybe some added homebrew stuff. But yeah, the biggest challenge is for sure, putting together the maps, and all the actual like Roll20 content as well. Life, baby, kid, wife, dog, fish, toad, cat, plants. Indeed, yeah. Don't forget the hermit crabs. That's what you all been seeing over here. Which you never see them during the day. Hermit crabs are nocturnal, but if you're ever, I guess on my Monday night Let's Play streams, you might see a crab roaming around in there. Yeah, I have. Anytime that my the very few times we go on vacation. Whenever my mom comes to babysit the house or the kiddo, if we go into PAX or something, then she always jokes that she's going to go to PetSmart because we're literally we're a pet store basically with all the animals that we have. Start using Adventures League content for the time between the main scenes. Yeah, I think so. I think there is some good, and the advantage to that is you could pick and choose. You could pick and choose what adventures would work well when, and they don't necessarily all have to tie into the main campaign, but as long as they have fun stories in of themselves, and you can make a way to tie different things into the camp. Like obviously the big thing for Eberron, I don't even think it's a spoiler, which is the fact that it takes place after this huge, Game of Thrones style war with all these different countries and factions, and then one of them basically just exploded due to this mysterious magical weapon of mass destruction that literally turned the entire area into like a DMZ. Like it's a wasteland of magical horror, and it's in the middle of this continent, and it's a big mystery and that created this big Cold War. Basically stopped everybody from fighting, because everybody's like, well, what the hell was that? And they created this kind of armistice. But there's a big mystery about like what caused this and what's in there, and that's all the high level stuff, and that's just a cool idea to tie that into like a big overarching campaign. Is of course you can discover how that worked. So it's interesting that the setting itself kind of comes with this built-in story, because unlike the Forgotten Realms, which has hundreds of years of lore and backstory that actually updates and all these different Tyranny of Dragons, Prince of the Apocalypse, they're all technically happening and they all reference each other. Eberron always takes place at the same time. It's always 5 years after this Mournland has been created or something. So it's always this one frozen moment in time, which is very helpful for a DM to craft a story around that, because all of the content and adventures take place in this same time, and it's just rife for exploring. At least, maybe not necessarily for campaigns forever, like the Forgotten Realms can do. That's kind of the disadvantage, I think. But the advantage is you could make at least one really good, memorable campaign, and you could maybe try to go even all the way up to 20 or close to 20, because it takes place in that one time period. So I think that'd be pretty cool. All right, so that's Eberron. I'm excited about that one, with the caveat that I would still have to make a campaign out of it. And that's really scary. That's a really scary thing to think about and try to figure out. Sivu, hey, thank you for your patronage, by the way. I just saw that. I haven't updated you on my credits or my shout-outs, but I do appreciate the patronage, and thank you for that. Let me blow my nose. It's just embarrassing at this point. I have to do that on the camera. Oh my goodness. When will I be free of the snot? When? When will I make my con saving throw? Alright, so that's Eberron. Jerome, welcome. Okay, next up is... might be a surprise. Actually, might not be a surprise for those of you that have listened to me talking about my adventures over the last couple of months and what I've got planned. Ghosts of Saltmarsh is not a very well-regarded campaign adventure, unlike Strahd. But I really like the pirate nautical theme of the adventure. I think the ocean pirate stuff went really well in Tomb of Annihilation. It was a lot of fun. I like the idea of having the ship be the headquarters of the adventure, the main base. There are cool things you could do, like have your players, gain NPCs for different areas of the ship. They have ship upgrades that they can get. I just think that's a neat idea. Now, Ghosts of Saltmarsh is not a great campaign. It's got some good adventures in it, but what it is it's kind of like it's Tales from the Yawning Portal in that it updates a bunch of older adventures for 5e. And there are 3 of them that are part of the Saltmarsh trilogy, which didn't even take place in Forgotten Realms. It was Greyhawk, I think. And then it adds basically just a bunch of other older adventures that just happen to have a nautical theme, which doesn't necessarily make a good campaign. And I don't think it is a very good campaign. What is a good campaign is Call from the Deep. So what I would do with this campaign idea is combine these 2 adventures. I would combine Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Yes, exactly, Jerome. Pick and choose. I would pick and choose the stuff that I like from Ghosts of Saltmarsh and combine it with the adventure Call from the Deep, which is a huge, campaign as long as any of the stuff Wizards has put out that released on the DM's Guild last year. Whenever I did my top 10 DM's Guild products that I reviewed last year, I believe Call from the Deep was number 1. It was my favorite product that I reviewed last year. And it is a nautical-themed adventure starring Illithids, which are freaking awesome. And it just so happens that everybody's getting excited about Illithids because of Baldur's Gate 3, because that's got all the Illithid stuff. And I think that'd be a really fun way of implementing how fun Illithids are, because they're a primary antagonist of Call from the Deep. And it does the whole cool, it almost feels like a mysterious alien invasion at one point, which is what I would play up. So I would basically hack together a combination of Ghosts of Saltmarsh with Call from the Deep and craft my own custom nautical-themed campaign. Takes place in the Forgotten Realms. I mean, the weird thing is I could have it take place in Eberron. I could use Eberron as a setting for any of these adventures, but it feels like if you're not going to do Eberron that specifically uses Eberron stuff, then it feels like it's a waste of a setting. But this one would be specifically in fact, there's that whole island chain that's if you look at the map of the Forgotten Realms, it's far to the west of the Sword Coast. I forget what it's called. It's not the Moonsea Isles. It's something else. Maybe it's I don't know. I forget. Anyway, I would just literally we would go off on the ocean and do fucking ocean stuff. Now, both Call from the Deep and Saltmarsh. First of all, I would obviously put Saltmarsh stuff in Forgotten Realms on the Sword Coast. Does use the Sword Coast for sure. And I would put Saltmarsh on the Sword Coast. It makes sense. You can put it near, I think, Neverwinter or somewhere in the swampy area. Have it start there. You could literally use the opening adventure from Saltmarsh, which is a cool I guess I don't want to go into spoilers about it, do I? But I think it's a good opening adventure that kind of plays with a haunted house theme, which could go over well. And then from there, I would immediately start hacking it apart because I don't like I think it's the second one in the trilogy. Actually, the actual Saltmarsh trilogy I think is crap. The second one, you go to this lizard folk dungeon in the swamps, and it's a huge dungeon, but you're not really supposed to fight your way through it. You're supposed to just talk to a bunch of lizards, and then you go back home. It's dumb. And then the third one I didn't really like either. I think maybe it's a Sahuagin dungeon or something. But I could use bits and pieces of that. Call from the Deep is more of the campaign that I could actually use because it does a cool thing where like an illithid ship crashes somewhere. You go find the crash zone and you realize like, oh shit, there's illithids around and they're already doing stuff into these different islands and factions, and there's instead of necessarily having a central illithid villain, there's like several kind of general level illithids that you end up dealing with. So it becomes like these mini adventures where each one ends with like an illithid boss of a different kind, and you slowly piece together this overarching plot until you get to their big, underground base. I do think Call from the Deep does end around the same level as all the other campaigns, which is the low teens. So, and that's something that I would like to change because if I'm going to run my own campaign, I feel like assuming we don't stretch it, and one thing I don't want to do also, I don't want to stretch out those low levels like we did with Tomb. I know that was a big problem with a lot of folks, and something I didn't realize when I was planning it, which is how long it would take us to hex crawl and dungeon crawl through the Tomb to where we were levels like 3 and 4 and 5 for like 8 or 9 sessions a piece. So we took 2 years and only ended up at level 12. Actually, not even that. We ended up at 11, didn't we? I think we ended up at 11 at the end, and it was only for 1 session. So one thing I want to fix with a new campaign, which I can do this with any of them, I think, is not stretch out those low levels so much, and ideally maybe even try to get a little bit higher. Try to end up at, not necessarily go to 20, but maybe try to get to like 14 or 15 at the end. I think would be pretty enjoyable. But I think the ocean theme is really fun, and I earlier this year, I think it was this year. God, how long has this year been? Like 14 years? It's kind of hard to tell. I played Pillars of Eternity 2, which is a RPG by the Obsidian folks based on the old Baldur's Gate games. And Pillars 2 specifically takes place in this big fantasy whoa, I can't say that word. Islands. Gesundheit. This big world of a bunch of islands, and it's a nautical themed adventure. Like, you're in your own ship, and the ideas I got were like, oh, you can pick up all these crew members as cool, like, when you meet an NPC and save them, instead of just like, okay, thanks, I'm going away now, you can like have them be like your ship chef or something, or your cannoneer. The ship battles are actually crap in that game, but the actual concept of like upgrading and working your ship was really cool. Going to different islands ended up being kind of cool. So that's kind of a lot of the motivation I got from doing, and at the same time I've been looking at Call from the Deep, and I actually bought Ghosts of Saltmarsh and read through it. I was a little disappointed by Saltmarsh, honestly, but thinking about how I could combine all these things together, I was like, yeah, I could actually, I think, craft a pretty fun nautical-themed ocean adventure, and then that, as I mentioned with talking about Curse of Strahd, this would be a good example of the swashbuckling high seas adventure stuff that I think would go over really, really well. Let me catch up on the chat for a second. Adam, glad you can make it. Yeah, I would definitely use, I could use maps and content. Unfortunately, Ghost of Saltmarsh I don't think has very good maps to where I would literally use the ones printed in there, but hopefully folks have always come through with making like higher quality maps of maps from the 5e books. And that's a good question also, is what do I call some of these adventures? Like, obviously Strahd is Strahd, but like Eberron, would I just call it Eberron Rising from the Last War? Would I call it just Eberron? Would I call it Eberron : whatever my adventure is? That's something to think about. Obviously, I could do Crafting Eberron. That works great. But for this one, it gets really confusing because obviously Saltmarsh is more marketable. But if somebody were to actually start watching these videos, they'd be like, well, wait a minute, this guy's hardly using any of the Saltmarsh content, even though it's called Ghost of Saltmarsh. So, or do I call it something different, like, DnD Pirates of the Sword Coast or something? It's less marketable that way, but maybe a little more, or Adventures of the Sword Coast. God, that sounds really generic, doesn't it, though? Everything's got Sword Coast in it. The tie-in crossover with BG3. I know, Brandon, that's something that, honestly, when they first announced Baldur's Gate 3 and showed that awesome trailer, with the Illithid ship coming in and the dragons and stuff, I was at the time looking seriously into doing this combo, Call from the Deep and Ghost of Saltmarsh, and I was looking at that going, yes, Illithids are awesome and fun, this could be so neat, and I could add in this whole Githyanki thing, and then you could take it into, once you get to the teen levels, you could have that be like this ultimate, suddenly you've defeated the Illithids here, but then maybe you have a chance to go back and I don't know, kick their ass in some wherever they came from kind of a thing. Because I really want to play up like Illithids as like the alien invaders kind of a thing, rather than this always generic threat that's a part of the background of the Forgotten Realms. I don't see any Call from the Deep campaign streams on YouTube. Might be the draw of the new viewer. Yeah, that's something I'm thinking about. Something that is, I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about that, which is what is the appeal for the channel and the viewers in terms of what we're doing next. I have no illusions about the fact that a lot of you probably found this channel because of Tomb of Annihilation, because you were searching for a Tomb of Annihilation stream. I know there's a lot of folks of you that have been with us since the beginning, and that's freaking awesome. But let's face it, like a lot of views and fans and things have come from that specifically, or from us doing, Storm King's Thunder, or Prince of the Apocalypse, or Fandom, or any of the big name ones, and that's a big draw. And it's fun because, like for example, the live chat. There's a no players allowed channel we have in the Discord, not really used right now, but during Tomb, it was a place for folks to get together and talk about stuff that was very, spoilery and tied into Tomb, because they knew what was coming, because I was adapting a lot of what that book was, versus if I did something that was more homebrew, then you don't have that through line to talk about. You do have my crafting streams where I can talk about that stuff, but you can't come to that table knowing all that information and knowledge, and that is something that I do consider and think about, which is a factor in a lot of these. That was a positive for when I talked about Curse of Strahd, for example. Is a big positive. Is everybody knows Strahd's a very well known one. That would be a big draw. The disadvantage being I'm not personally super into it. Yeah, Fandover obviously is a big one, probably the biggest one. No surprise that we started there. Do you think hacking Ghosts of Saltmarsh and Call of the Deep would be less weekly work for you than Eberron? I have no idea. All of this would be a lot of work. I honestly don't remember if Call from the Deep had maps or not. I think it did. I think it does. I think it has maps you can use. Saltmarsh, though, has shitty maps that I would not use. But, so one interesting thing, like, for example, I found somebody that, you can Google search or whatever, and find, and Reddit's a great source of this, people that make good-looking battle maps, full color and detail, based on shitty maps that exist already. So, like, Dungeon of the Mad Mage is a great example, where the maps that Wizards provides are shit, in my opinion. Not to put too fine a word on it. I don't like that style at all, sorry. I don't think it looks good on Roll20. But you can find folks, either through Patreon or through whatever else, that provide better maps of those maps. So the nice thing is, if something is an established adventure or popular enough like Call from the Deep, you can find, you don't have to literally make the maps yourself. You can find maps that you can use. You'll still have to throw tokens and dynamic lighting and stuff on top of it, but that part at least helps a lot. So that is probably, because those are established campaigns, that might be easier than doing Eberron. So yeah, I would say that doing this one, in terms of making physical maps and content, because I would try to mostly use the campaign that's already there in Call from the Deep, hack together parts of Saltmarsh, probably, throw in some other fun, adventures and content in there. But I like the ocean theme. I think it could work very well and be very fun. Eberron, I would wait until you have a villain and cult related to whoever that is. Take the Illithid variants. Yes. Yeah, obviously you could definitely use, and I think they're in Call from the Deep too. They have a lot of fun Illithid versions. Hype for BG3 and Illithid stuff will be around for a while too. Indeed, that's true. That's true. I'm always thinking about those Illithids. Honestly, I think they're a lot of fun in Call from the Deep. I won't go into any spoiler stuff, but I think it does cool stuff with Illithids as being the primary big bads, but also the fact that, there are big, dangerous things that lurk underwater, and what happens if Illithids get their hands on those things. That also leads to some cool, like, late-game, fun boss shenanigans. Do you always want to official or branch out more because you have one or two on here that you want to branch out? You mean like, just doing official? I mean, that's the debate. That's part of the thing that I'm thinking of is, do I always need to keep doing official 5e adventures, or do I have the freedom of doing a homebrew thing? Now, technically, we're doing a homebrew thing right now. So, and I could have said, no, Chris, I want you to do an established adventure. But we were all excited about doing a homebrew adventure. I think Chris is an incredibly good designer, and I maintain that I did not particularly think Storm King's Thunder is a great campaign for us, but I think all the stuff that he added to that campaign made it a good adventure. So I was very on board with him doing a homebrew, and very on board with him doing a high-level thing. But that's the other factor, is we're going to be coming off of that. Let's be honest, nobody's searching YouTube for War for the Lost Plane for a homebrew. I think it's fun that a lot of you are interested in us enough to where enjoy us enough, obviously you as patrons, to watch us do whatever, ideally, as long as it's D&D and we're having fun and we've got the same energy and everything else. I think we have that flexibility. That being said, we're coming off of a homebrew adventure that's completely original and all of that, so I do feel a little bit of pressure to do something that's more established. Not necessarily like, okay, now we're back to normal, which is us doing 5e, official 5e campaign stuff all the time, but especially if War for the Lost Plane ends up taking a while into next year, it would probably benefit us to do like, okay, now we're going to do, Curse of Strahd or something big, and that'll help. Yes, I always want the channel to grow and get more fans and all of that, but I do this because I want to play D&D with my friends. Like, that's the honest truth. Like, that was the start of it. We did not start this saying, oh man, we want to start a D&D show. We started this because we did this a little bit. We played Pathfinder a bit in the past with another DM and had fun with it, and I was like, man, I miss doing that. That was a fun way for us to play together online. We're all older now. It's harder for us to get together. We all live far apart. Wouldn't it be great to start something? And we started actually with Shadowrun first because I liked that, and then D&D 5e ended up becoming a thing. We're like, let's do that. So, and it just kind of grew. And then from there, we're like, well, let's record these, just for funsies, and then the rest is history. I can go over this through the channel, but it's never been my primary concern to put on a show, but I have tried to improve the quality of the show through the years, and I think that's helped us as a group because of what we all like to do in terms of pacing and what we want to focus on and the fun moments versus the minute details and getting too in the weeds about rules and all of that. Like, there are groups that enjoy that stuff, and that's fine. If all of you at the table like that, you do you. I'm not saying that's a bad way to play, but it's not the way that we want to play. So we focus on that stuff. I'm getting off on a huge tangent here, but yeah, the fun is always there first. And all of these that I'm talking about, I think, with maybe the exception of Strahd, I think would be good choices for the group. Now, that there is a difference between what I think would be good choices for the growth of the channel. So, and obviously the ones that are more marketable, especially doing a straight-up campaign like a Strahd, are going to be more popular and able to bring those eyeballs in. But that's not what I'm here for. And I do like having the channel grow. I think that's a lot of fun. It's awesome having patrons and having you all support and be big fans. I think that's been really fun. And yeah, it's great to have the channel grow. At some point, it would be nervous if it grows a lot. But I like the rate at which it's growing now, so I'll say that. All right, that's enough of the nautical adventure. But that's a fun one to do, and I think it would be fun to hack that apart. You need me to turn off the camera for a second?
No, it's fine. I'm just listening.
Oh, okay.
I'm spying now.
You're spying, yes. Put the baby down?
Yes.
All right, so that is...
Ooh, Call of the Deep, yeah.
Let's see, I turn that one off, and now... So, as you've expected, we're going to talk about... you're going to be a Debbie Downer, a lot of work in Roll20 instead of a call from the... Yeah, for sure. It would be a lot. Like, a lot of these, and the same thing with Eberron, is making, maps and tokens and all of that would be a lot of work for sure.
Oh dear Lord.
the maps alone would be huge. Yeah, it would be. One that would not be a lot of work, at least not nearly as much work as the others, is Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. And this one, I'm excited to even be excited about it, because it's been a long time since I've been excited about a new D&D 5e campaign adventure. I've been very down on their maps. I've been not too into the stories and themes, like Betrayal in Avernus. I wasn't... is it called... Was it called? No, Descent into Avernus. Descent into Avernus, yeah. I wasn't super into that one. I wasn't into Waterdeep Dragon Heist or any of those. So it's been a while since I've been excited about a new release. And I kept thinking, halfway through Tomb of Annihilation, always kind of thinking ahead. And I'm like, man, I mean, at this point, there's going to be so many fun adventures for me to choose from that of course I'll just choose another 5e adventure, official 5e adventure to do for our next campaign. And then you got through all of these releases where it was Avernus and Dragon Heist and all these, and I was like, oh no, I don't like any of these. These are not what I'm into. And then finally, it's literally come down to the wire where I have to choose something, and Icewind Dale releases, and I like it. I liked it a lot. It was one of my most positive Roll20 reviews I've given for a 5e campaign book in a long time. You were making me so nervous sitting there staring at me. Holy crap, woman. Oh my god. I feel like I'm taking a test or something.
You are. I'm judging you so much.
Oh my gosh, I'm always being judged.
I am judging what you're saying about these different things, because I have heard everything so far, and I refrain from opinions. But all right, I'll leave to make.
I've got your survey results in.
You don't know which one was mine.
No, but I could probably guess.
Oh, more than likely. I was not very kind on a couple of things.
Indeed. So, Icewind Dale. It's got good maps, which is always good. Did you see all the animals just followed her, by the way? Just at her beck and call. It's basically 3 stories in one. I think it's got some problems with its overarching narrative, but they're fun problems to tackle. Like, I'm already formulating ideas about how to tie those different elements together and create a really satisfying story. But I like the set pieces. I like the ideas. I like the setting. I think the snowy, isolated area of 10 Towns is a neat setting. Even though we've technically already been there, unfortunately, our first couple sessions, not the very first ones, but the later ones, our tier 1. And anyway, Storm King's Thunder. We spent some time in the 10 Towns region, Bryn Shander and all that. So it's kind of a bummer we were already there for a little bit. But this will be different. It'll be a full campaign. It takes place in Icewind Dale. And I'm not going to go into spoilers if you haven't read it or looked at it. But I think it does a lot of really fun things. A lot of really... it was not what I expected. It doesn't lead too hard into the horror theme. There's only, in fact, one particular dungeon towards the end that really plays upon the horror idea. Now, you can make it as, a survival, any of those classic, like, Vertical Limit or whatever those... No, that's not classic. But, a protagonist versus the environment, story. You can make it that kind of dangerous horror if you want to, or you can play it up as just more just exotic, stranger in a strange land, adventure. But it's got a lot going for it. I really enjoy it. Most importantly, it is an established, Roll20 adventure that's got maps. It's got tokens. It's got a neat thing where there's plenty of towns and quests and locations. It does a good balance between having big set pieces and main quest things, while also having a lot of good supplemental side content that you can tackle, and you can pick and choose a lot of that side content, which is really, really good. Need to actually catch up on the chat for a second. Frostmaiden will get a huge following on YouTube. I agree. That's definitely, well, as I just mentioned in the rant I had earlier, but that's a factor. It is the hot new thing. Although I believe it was Tiny that mentioned this, who had a good point. It was like, well, I'm playing Frostmaiden right now, so I would specifically not want to watch you all play it because I don't want to spoil myself on stuff. And that's kind of a good point, is if it's too new, then some folks might actually want to be like, well, I want to get through my own game. But the advantage is we're not starting right now. And I mentioned earlier in the stream, I don't know when we would start, but it would not be this year for sure. Earliest would be January, maybe later than that, especially if we're having to take time off for the holidays and for other stuff going on. This week we're actually doing a one-shot instead of our usual campaign because we've got some folks out of town. So, all those things push the date further back. So, it might be February of next year by the time I start this campaign. So that's another factor. Is it's new. It would be the hot newness without literally starting, when it launches or something. But that would be pretty big, I think, is announcing. And that's something that for a long time I was thinking we wouldn't be able to do because I was like really worried about all these new 5e campaigns that were coming out, being like, oh man, I'm not liking this, I'm not liking that. These aren't really speaking to me. Will I ever be able to actually do a semi-recent one like I did with Tomb? And Frostmaiden is the first one that's been out in years that I'm like, yes, I could see myself running this. I'm already looking at the story and thinking about how I can tie different things together, how I can change things, and how it would be a very fun series of crafting, I don't know what you'd call it, crafting Icewind Dale, I guess, in terms of, how to bounce ideas off of everybody and figure out how best to do these different things and which towns do we focus on and which quest do we do in the beginning and what kind of, do we want to worry about any kind of environmental hazards or how that is all going to play in. So I think that could be a lot of fun. It is still a level 1 through 12. It does the same old in terms of a 5e campaign adventure. It has those restrictions where it ultimately, I think, only goes to the same thing. And it does... One thing I worry about is I wonder if it's a bit too much like Tomb in that it puts the players in an isolated, exotic area and they can never... And that's the whole campaign. Obviously... a snowy region is different than a jungle, setting-wise, but still like the theme of being in this strange place. Now, you could fix that, and I think it's already fixed by one important thing, and that is the place has a bunch of towns. It's literally called the 10 Towns region. Unlike Chult, which has the one town in the very beginning, and then you're just left with a whole bunch of, exploration. This one, at least for the first third of the adventure, is a lot of going to all these different towns and doing all these things around those towns. So I think that helps alleviate everything. And also, I think it's a lot less exotic and remote than Chult, and I think at least, and one thing I can't really plan is, I won't know what characters my players are playing, but you could have a lot of players be from that region, have their characters be from the region, have more personal stakes there. Whereas Chult, it was specifically like I can't have anybody from Chult necessarily, but I need personal quests still to tie them there. So I think in terms of exotic region, I think Icewind Dale is similar to Tomb Annihilation in some ways, but also a little bit easier to get across, I believe. Counters are not properly balanced. Oh no, I mean, yeah, we can get into the weeds, but I don't necessarily want to get too specific right now, but I just, in terms of talking about kind of why I'm interested and yes, Frostmaiden would be very popular for folks. It would be a really fun one to do a crafting one on because with stuff like Eberron, it's just me talking about, like, it's me building maps and me talking about, like, why I think this would work. But for something like Frostmaiden, similar to Tomb, especially if I'm running it mostly from the content in the book, that allows a lot of people to come to the table with that knowledge, with that experience, and say, hey, and it allows me to look up information too. How did other DMs handle, this particular plot point, or how did they tie together these things? That makes all that process a lot easier, and I can focus more on that versus actually having to build maps and tokens, because Frostmaiden already has all that stuff built in. Now, I would still bring in my own content for sure. Probably more than I did with Tomb. I didn't add very much to Tomb at all in terms of maps and stuff. But I could see myself doing that, at least, or look up stuff from the DM's Guild, for example, that has extra little adventures or side content or something that happens to take place in that region. You could add that in there, but I think it checks all the boxes for me. It just, all these other ones have a lot of advantages and disadvantages, and I struggle to think of what the disadvantage to running this adventure would be. The only, the nitpickiest one I can think of is maybe it's a little bit too similar to Tomb in terms of it's, you're in this exotic location, or it needs a little bit of work on the story. But I mean, I did a lot of work on the story in Tomb also, that's no problem. So, and yeah, part of the work that I would do for Frostmaiden would be the BBEG and who is that exactly, because a big problem, I mean, without going into spoilers too much, the main issue with this campaign is it's really 3 separate adventures, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 2 plus, put together, and the 3 of them, you could very easily not have them tied into each other very well at all, and that's kind of how it's presented in the book, frankly. They just all happen to take place in the Icewind Dale region. Very, very loosely tied, and partly what I would want to try to do is put them together better. I still like the idea of starting off without getting the immediate main quest dumped on you, because I think that was problematic in Tomb, especially given how long the adventure ended up being. I told him, okay, the soul death curse is happening, the soulmonger's in here, you need to find that area and all that. That was like a dump of a main quest, and then they got a bunch of side quests along the way. Instead, I think it would work better if it was hey, here's some bad stuff happening in this region, maybe we don't even know why, here's this other villain doing stuff, we need to take care of him, and then maybe as you deal with that, what maybe you think was the BBEG, you deal with, and then you figure out, oh no, it was part of this bigger scheme that's tied into this other thing. So instead it organically develops, rather than at the beginning you're oh, we gotta go stop, Arl, and then go from there. Instead it's no, we gotta go stop this person, but then it turns out this person was either working with or holding back or against, those are the kind of things we can decide, and organically develop the plot. And I think Frostmaiden is uniquely equipped to be able to do that with that extra story work. But I think that can be very fun as a way to discuss how to do all that during the pre-production and while we're running the game in Frostmaiden. So in terms of all of these, I struggle to think of what are the disadvantages to running this. And then we have one bonus that I want to go over. A bonus idea that I have, and it's been percolating for a while. So to introduce this idea, I've mentioned this before many times, but I don't have a desire to do a completely homebrewed game. I don't want to make my own world. At some point I just don't have the time for it, but honestly, if I would make my own world, I would just write a novel at that point. It's just the amount of world and stuff that would put into that, or time. It never has appealed, despite loving being a DM and loving doing these adventures. It's never appealed to me to do my entire own world. Instead, I would rather take a setting and then add my own flavor onto the individual characters and moments and stories and turn those things to making it a good thing, but still using that framework. So, that being said, while I don't want to create my own homebrewed world, I do think it would be interesting to adapt something that is not D&D into D&D, and what I've been looking at is a lot of my favorite video games. How can I adapt some of my favorite video games into a D&D campaign? And the one that I have thought about for years, in terms of I keep thinking how much of a cool, interesting idea this would be for a campaign, is the Quest for Glory series from Sierra from the 90s / late 80s, honestly, if we start with the first one. I have so much nostalgia, and first of all, if you know anything about these series, and have played them and enjoy them, then we're probably best friends. I have so much nostalgia and love for this series. I think I started with Quest for Glory 4, one of the first PC games I ever played. Absolutely magical. It looks like a VGA adventure game, like the King's Quest games and a lot of those that came out in the golden age of the early 90s. But they were RPGs that just used that engine. And it was a really fun series because it took place in this fantasy world that used a lot of different themes and locations. And even though I played the fourth one first, which is still, I think, the best one, widely considered to be the best one, the whole series is very good, and I ended up playing the whole series I think a year or two later. It's still when I was a very, I'm talking like 9 or 10, that magical time where it's just, you've got so much nostalgia for all the stuff that you were doing. And I think it would be a really, really fun, interesting campaign. They were made for only one player, definitely not D&D, so it would be a lot of work to adapt this in there. And there are 5 games. I don't even know if I would use the 5th one, though, because I think the trajectory actually follows pretty well with just the 4. But what's interesting is that they would be 4 separate mini-campaigns that would be kind of tied together through... obviously you're playing the same adventurers, and that was a thing you could do with these old games is you could actually import your character into the next one. Literally, you could insert a floppy disk. I'm sounding real old now. Put it in there and throw your character on there, and then import that character into the next game, and you would have way higher skills. The first game is like Germanic, fairy tale, fantasy world. There's a forest, there's a castle, there's a curse. It feels very like kind of almost Disney movie-esque with all the different themes. But there's fantasy creatures, there's monsters, there is combat in these games. Part of the work I would have to do is there aren't any dungeons, so you'd have to really adapt things to make it more D&D-like, I think. And also time is a factor in these games, which doesn't... you can do as a DM, but that gets very challenging to literally put a timer on doing different things. These games, it was it had a full day-night cycle, and things would happen on certain days, and that was a big part of the game. The second one, and the idea is you would meet the innkeepers were these cat people in the first game, and then after you solve the quest of the first game and you beat it, then they say hey, you want to travel to our hometown and help us with a problem we have there, and so you'll travel to that location with that same character and then have this separate campaign. The second one is all Arabian Nights. It takes place in this fantasy version of the Middle Eastern area with it's a city in the middle of a desert. There's elementals and genies and all that. It's mainly urban in terms of the setting it's got, so it's a lot different than the first game. The third game, you travel to this fantasy version of Africa, which is all about warring tribes that you have to kind of mediate between, and it has also a giant city you're dealing with and just a huge overland area. And the problem is a lot of the gameplay and a lot of the combat is overland travel, which specifically I don't think works very well for D&D, so it would be a lot of work. I'm talking about it because I think it's a lot of fun. The fourth game is my personal favorite, one of my favorite games of all time, which takes place in Gothic Transylvania, which I know I just talked about how Strahd wouldn't work because of that, but the difference is each of these is more like a Phandelver-sized campaign. So you're combining these 4 mini campaigns into one overarching campaign. It would be the first one would be tier 1, the second and third one would probably be tier 2, and the fourth one would be tier 3. It would follow the trajectory of your same characters going to all these different locations. And it works to where your third one, you meet the main villain in the second one, and then he ends up being behind the scenes in the third one, or the third, I think, villain works for the second villain. I forget how it... And you end up getting sucked into a portal, and that's how you end up in this world in the fourth one. It's all this gothic, there's vampires and undead and all these great things happening. It's cool how the whole Cthulhu cult in the fourth one, that's the big quest you have to solve, is to stop them from raising this big Cthulhu monster. Each one is a different setting and theme, so it would really change up the feel of each of these campaigns despite being the same campaign. So I think that would be a really fun idea, but honestly it would be obviously so much work because these don't exist in any form in D&D. If you Google search even, and some folks have had ideas about it, but it's never really reached fruition. There was a Neverwinter Nights module based on the first game that I played and did a pretty decent job. But it would be very, very challenging. You would have to make so many changes, especially in the second and third game, I think, to make it work. But it's just an idea that I had. It made this list because I was very excited about doing this, but it's one of those where it's probably I'm like the only one who's like really excited about this. I think I could make it fun, but the amount of work that would be created because, obviously we're making maps, we're making tokens, we're having to make new rules in terms of, hey, you can only play these certain races and classes because you're all heroes, so you can't be like, warlocks and clerics and shit. You're like, you can be fighters and wizards and that kind of thing. And certain races would be too exotic. So it'd be more of a, homebrew style world with its own restrictions and things, but I'm taking it all from a video game series. And the other cool thing is that obviously you could do a Let's Play of this series, and that would be almost the basis for doing a crafting thing, because then people could see me play the games, talk about them, and say, okay, how do we then adapt this content into an actual campaign? So that's the idea that I'm thinking of. It's a way left field, like crazy concept, and obviously it would not grow the channel at all because nobody probably gives a shit about this. If you do, you're an amazing person, because I think they're great games. You can actually find them on Steam, called The Quest for Glory Anthology. Includes 1 through 5. I think they're $10. You can get them on sale. Really good game. If you like point and click adventure, but they are RPGs. Like there's combat, there's skills and everything. That would just be a fun excuse for me to play. So I think that'd be a lot of fun. It's just an idea, but I do realize that it would be an absolute nightmare to try to adapt. It would involve an incredible amount of work to try to create it from from scratch, basically, just trying to adapt a video game into D&D. But you could even play around with the fact that they are 4 separate campaigns. You could have breaks in between, not like a full campaign break, but if somebody wanted to run, like a Tales from the Unknown Portal dungeon or something in between to allow me to kind of catch up to the next, campaign that we have planned, that would be another interesting thing, is because they do have hard breaks in those different games. Each one of those tells a complete story from start to finish, but then it does have things that tie them together. The first one really doesn't. The first one's kind of its own thing, and you're kind of coming into your own. But once you start in with the second one, that introduces the BBEG, and then it kind of builds from there. And it follows a nice, hero's journey trajectory, I think. So just an idea. I think it'd be pretty fun, but I think that's all I've got. I know some of you have joined me about halfway. Obviously, you'll be able to watch this video. I will be releasing it publicly, I think tomorrow on Friday, in lieu of doing the review video on Friday. That'll be the video. And then at the same time, I will release... or obviously you can just look, if you've already got the link, if you're a patron, you can look it up whenever. And at the same time, I will put a poll up where all of you can formally vote on which ones, and I'll do it where you don't have to just pick one. You can choose all the ones that you're excited about also, based on kind of what we've discussed here and what your own thoughts are, because I do want to solicit feedback from all of you as patrons, as being big fans, and what you want to see us do, and especially after you've heard my thoughts and feelings about each one and kind of where my head's at, where you all feel like what would work best for us, would work best for me, what you'd want to see us do, and all that. Right now I don't have a formal time frame on like when I would start doing crafting, for example. Certainly no sooner than at some point in November. And we may look at doing a more, bi-weekly or something where it's not necessarily every week until we get a little bit closer to where I have a time frame of, okay, now we're going to, because the main concern is I don't want to have 10 or 20 crafting episodes until the actual campaign starts. I think that would be probably a dangerous, too much over prepping. And then literally if somebody's looking at the playlist and they just see all those craftings, that can be kind of a bummer as well. So we'll still play with that. As I said, I'm not sure when War for the Lost Plane will end, but that is something to think about in terms of how, when to do the crafting episodes and how much prep work to do. But I will have some time. It just depends on how much time I want to actually spend doing, maps and tokens and trying to find adventures to plug them in versus already having that content there and just being able to add little bits and things and then develop the story better than if I didn't. So those are all the ideas that I have. I am clicking through all my things so I can get rid of these. There we go. So thank you all so much for joining me for this. This was a lot of fun. I have no idea if anybody would show up, so I appreciate all of you. And just like a crafting series, being able to bounce ideas off of all of you, get your feedback from that. That's been a lot of fun. Charlene, to answer your question, I don't think anybody has played them. Chris, I think, is aware of them. But I don't think anybody has played those games, so they would not, which I think would be my advantage, because if anybody played the games, they would know way too much about how it works. But yeah, let me, I appreciate all this feedback. It's been really fun to share with all of you. I will be releasing this video publicly, so everybody who subscribes can leave a comment. But for you patrons specifically, you'll be able to vote in the poll starting tomorrow, and I can leave it up for a while, based on kind of all the things that you want to see based on the ones we just went over, which, just to go over really quick, the 5 that we've narrowed it down to, that I've narrowed it down to, and now I'm kind of punting it to you all to see where your thoughts are. Curse of Strahd, Eberron, just a campaign in Eberron, Ghosts of Saltmarsh / Call from the Deep, so a hacked together like nautical campaign pulling from both of those campaigns, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden, and Quest for Glory, being a video game adaptation of that anthology. So those are all the ideas I have for the next campaign that I do will be one of those 5 campaign ideas. And based on that, with your help and with some more thoughts and from all of you, then we can formulate a plan from there, and we'll be ready to start prepping that campaign. So thank you all for joining me, and I hope you all can be in attendance for our Friday stream, which will be a special one-shot that Heather is DMing, because we'll have some folks out of town, so we're doing a special limited one-shot that she is excited about doing.
Yes, come watch me DM again for one more time. And I promise it will hopefully not be bad.
Exactly. She promises that it won't be bad.
He doesn't, but I do.
All right. Thank you, everyone, so much. See you then.